Take one.
I moved near downtown in 1986. My family owns a factory just south of downtown, and I went into the factory one night with a mattress, and I got one of the offices in the factory secured as my own place. At the time, I was making art, and I found a lot of other artists downtown. It was a very short bus trip. I think I walked it 2 or 3 times, half out of my mind. I heard about Al's Bar. It was like this place you got to go, but you had to be 21 and over. I came up with a friend. I didn't even have a fake ID. I was like 19 at the time. The doorman was Al Roth. We just chatted him up, and he let us in. All of a sudden, we were in a bar, and there were like adults there. I was like, oh my God, we got in. Oh my God, this is amazing. We ordered beers, and then we went outside to my friend's car, and old George was standing there. Call Central Casting. I need an old guy from the 1930s. It was too real to be real. And old George was there talking to this fucked up homeless guy. And he turns to us and he goes, have you ever heard of Three Dog Night? And I said, yeah, I've heard of Three Dog Night. I'm the singer from Three Dog Night. And I said, well, sing One Is the Loneliest Number. And he starts singing it. And it's the fucking singer from Three Dog Night. And I'm like, whoa. And then somebody walks up and starts talking to him, and they walk away. And old George says, well, he might make it in a review on a Sunday, and walks back into the American Hotel. It's like, what the fuck just happened? It was like, we got to get back inside. We might miss something. And that was the zeal with which we would go to Al's Bar. In late 93, I quit drinking. I was a pretty heavy drinker, and there's a lot of problems in my life because of it. And I woke up one morning and said, that's it, I quit. And all of a sudden, things started to change in my life. I had been one of Al's Bar's best customers. I don't know if I have the bragging rights of being the best customer, but I saw Mark Kreisel about 2 or 3 weeks after I had quit drinking. And he said, well, I'm looking for a manager. I need someone to manage the bar and manage the hotel. I knew the hotel, having drank at Al's Bar for years. By the time I actually moved in the American Hotel, I probably knew half the people who lived there. Getting a room was just as easy as handing the cash over. There was no credit check, put it that way. When I was bartending, I would watch the faces of the people who walked into Al's Bar for the first time. Half of them would have that look of terror. They had never been in any place this terrifying. But then there was the look of people who had never been in a place this authentic, had never been in a place with bricks on the wall. You know, everything they had ever been in was suburban and stuccoed. And here they were, and it's that night they went to that part of town, bringing people into the American Hotel. They had never been in a place this real. You'd meet an old friend. Oh, where are you living now? Oh, come visit me. It's this cool bar, Al's Bar. And then you'd hear a story that you were like this gangster because you lived in this weird place that they couldn't understand it. Oh, he's living in LA in this weird place and there's scary people. I mean, how do you tell somebody back in suburbia after you've been there? That was the authenticity of the American Hotel and Al's Bar. And then the best part was you bring a girl up to the American Hotel and they'd be like, oh my God, he lives in this amazing place. He's so authentic. I have to sleep with him. And you go out with her for about 2 weeks and they'd be like, oh my God, he lives in this shithole. And I'm out of here. And then the next day you're like, hey, come see my cool place. Oh my God, he's so authentic. And you could rack up a few notches in your belt with the authenticity factor. I started Coagula in 1992 as kind of an underground newspaper for the art world. I didn't care if I upset anybody. I wanted to just have this magazine that you had to pick up and read because it would just say things that you just couldn't believe. I had been going to Cal State LA where I had done an underground newspaper, so I knew what to do as far as publishing, and it became very successful. I had the Coagula offices in the American Hotel. I had a Macintosh, a Quadra, and I would, do desktop publishing, and advertisers were pursuing me. If you wanted to buy an ad in Coagula, you had to literally come to the American Hotel, which you couldn't get in if you didn't have a key, so people would stand outside the window and scream my name. Matt, I want to give you money to buy an ad in Coagula. There was no email. There were no cell phones. There was no internet to speak of. It may as well have been the 19th century, and I had a letterpress. So Coagula was growing despite my lack of effort. I was just writing crazy art reviews, and some people in New York were writing crazy commentary on the New York art world. We were putting it together every 2 months, and we published pretty consistently, despite all the chaos in the American Hotel. And then I ended up moving out of here to the brewery late in 1995. By then, Michael Salerno was selling advertising for me, and he actually had a phone, which is a big deal. And that's when Coagula really got established. And then the art world was like, oh shit, this isn't going anywhere. It could have easily just withered and disappeared at the American Hotel with all the chaos going on here. But it really proved to me that people wanted there to be a magazine that attacked the art world. Sometimes they wanted it more than I did. I knew Don Jones way before I lived in American Hotel. He was always at the bar about 6 o'clock at the latest. By the time I was bartending in the 90s, he was still there, and he would do things like offer you advice for a beer. And one day Don Jones said, I've got a slogan for Coagula Art Journal. I will trade you the slogan I have for a beer. I was more entertained than I really had the confidence that he was going to give me something. So I bought the beer, gave him the beer, and he took it, man, he took a big slug and he went, the lowdown on high art. My mind just was blown. I was like, it was perfect. It was a perfect description of what we did. We were the lowdown on high art. That was Don Jones in a way. Like, he was just this guy kind of hustling something from you. But when he had to, he really came through with the goods. He had something beyond just a street wisdom that really separated him from just the average weird old guy. He worked for Amtrak, and Don would be out of town for 4 days while the train went to New Orleans and back. And then he'd be here for a while. And it was a pretty decent job. It paid well. It paid for the rent, paid for him to get high. He was never any trouble as far as a lot of people with drug problems become real scary. That was never Don. When Don Jones passed away, on the back cover of Coagula, Rollo Castillo had done an illustration of him, and it said Don Jones, and it just said American. It was red, white, and blue. We shipped 101 boxes of Coagula to New York City. All of them were destroyed in a train derailment. Don Jones, who had worked on the trains for most of his life, the issue that memorialized him was destroyed in a train derailment. I received a UPS insurance settlement of $13,000. It blew my mind, like a gift from Don Jones from beyond. When I was at the American Hotel, there was a number of photographers who just lived around. I mean, there was a lot of artists in the arts district. Gary Leonard would always come by. I had a standing offer with Gary to trade him photographs. In exchange, he had an ad in Coagula. And then, maybe 10 times over the years, I would call him up, hey, Gary, do you have a photo of this? And the next day I would get it. In fact, Gary did this photo of OJ and Nicole. And then I did this, Does the Art World Care About OJ? This was during the whole insane hype, because the news helicopters were above the men's central jail, which is just north of the American Hotel. And we'd hear the helicopters every day. So you could tell when OJ had gotten to court, because the helicopters sounded different distance-wise. It was like you could hear the helicopters here. Oh, okay, they're going. And then, oh, no, now he's at trial. There was another photographer who we worked with, Rick Corrales. He invented cameras that would do like 360 views. He was a real pioneer. And he was always coming up with the most experimental stuff. Rick Corrales didn't live in the American Hotel, but you would have thought he did, because he came down here all the time. Rick worked at the LA Times, and his friend who he smoked pot with was Bob Bertero. Bob's like this old hippie, and Bob and I became very close, and Bob did a lot of photography for Coagula. There's a photo Bob took of me in April of 1995 where I'm wearing an army helmet and an army vest. I have a tattoo showing, and I'm holding a paintbrush like an art soldier. I like it now because I look a lot younger, of course. Bob left Texas and came to downtown LA and was working freelance at the LA Times. Bob did a lot of cocaine in the early 70s and ended up with nasal cavity cancer. His cancer medication had ruined his kidneys. He ended up on dialysis. The reason he was smoking a lot of pot, in addition to being an old hippie, was it really was medical marijuana for him. But I was there the day that he had been cancer-free for 5 years, which is considered recovery. And it was the happiest day of his life, he said. And that was in 96. And he lived another 10 years. He died in September of 2006 from kidney failure. Rick's specialty was modeling shots, because his specialty was girls. You don't think of that guy as the guy who gets a lot of chicks, but he had such a personality. One of the things Rick did would be his documentation of what's now the Arts District and this neighborhood. When they had a grand opening with coffee strippers in Bloom's General Store, Alberto drove this contraption called the flame-throwing espresso rod. There's a great picture of everybody gathered in the streets, and it's from the roof of the building across the street from the American Hotel. The whole street is packed. The sun was just going down. It's this very romantic shot. You can actually see in my window the computer on my desk where I would do Coagula from. I was like, hey, look. I used to think of it as like Rick documenting this golden era, and yet it never produced the great actor, singer, or musician that it went down in history. It fed the lives of the people in it. But how did that translate to the real world? I think the people who were here specifically to avoid the world. I visited Rick Corrales in the hospital. He had had stomach cancer. He was smiling, he was like jovial, and he was talking about some photos he was going to be doing, and he was doing these lenticular things with photos where you look at it one way, it's one thing, you look at it the other way, it's another thing, and how they were going to be billboards, and that was the wave of the future, and he had patents. He was happy, like probably the happiest I'd ever seen him, and so upbeat. And yeah, 3 weeks later, he was gone. I saw Bob talking to this really hot chick at Al's bar one night. And then the next morning, I saw her and him at coffee in Little Tokyo. I'm like, wow, how'd that old hippie this girl was really hot. So I said, well, what's up? He goes, oh, you just start reading their astrology chart, and pretty soon they start taking their clothes off. And I'm like, I got to figure this out. Okay, what's the parlor trick here? Bob said, well, give me your birthday. And so I gave him my birthday, and he gave me an astrology reading. And I didn't believe in astrology, but Bob was saying things that were just way too eerily accurate about certain motivations of mine psychologically that were just, whoa, this is a little too personal. I was like, whoa. Do you really want somebody to know the real you? I had recently gotten sober when I moved to the American Hotel, and I needed something to do. And every day I would walk to the LA Downtown Library, and I started reading these astrology books. So after a year and a half, I had read like hundreds of books. And every day, Bob and I would talk about astrology. Then there was another guy in the American Hotel named John Edwards, and he was the janitor at Al's bar. He'd get up every day to clean Al's bar every morning. And John Edwards also had learned astrology back in the 60s when it was really trendy. And so I would talk to John about astrology, and then I would talk to Bob about astrology. I was learning, and in 2000, when the dot-com boom was taking off, I ended up getting a job writing horoscopes. It was that time where they needed people to write. They needed content on the internet to get traffic to their site. And somebody knew that I knew astrology and recommended me to a friend at a party. And 3 days later, I had an office job in Beverly Hills writing horoscopes. And I was like, if Bob could see me now, I know that you're probably going to hear a lot of stories of people bottoming out at the American Hotel, but I actually got sober and then moved to the American Hotel and actually got my life together here in a weird way. My parents were going to dinner in Little Tokyo once, and I was upstairs watching like the basketball finals or something. And we had walked down to Bloom's General Store to get some snacks or something to go back and watch. And all of a sudden there's my parents, and they're like, oh, we're going to dinner in Little Tokyo. I mean, luckily I was cleaned up. I looked presentable. And so I let my friend back in to watch the basketball finals, and went to dinner in Little Tokyo and hung out with my parents, and they dropped me off, and they were totally relieved. You could just see them like, oh shit, should we stop and see him? What do we want to know? What do we not want to know? The wisest parents are the ones who just don't want to know. But on occasion, you'd see parents showing up for their kids, paying the rent. A guy living in a room, he'd be all clean cut, and you'd find out that he was getting disability for schizophrenia or disability for HIV, AIDS. And then the next guy, the one that was strung out that you were worried about, his dad showed up in a Mercedes to pay the rent. It was that insane mix. I mean, the artist moved here first because it was cheap. But the reason it was cheap is because it was dead end. And there was still a lot of the dead end. The dead end never left. Don't think when you come downtown that you're the first one to ever throw a party here, that you're the first one to get drunk here, that you're the first one to have a wild time here. Here's people who are now probably old enough to be your parents, and they were tearing this place up, and they knew that they weren't the first ones to party here because this place already had a legacy. had basically an Al's Bar phase. Mine lasted about 12 years. Some people would hang out at Al's Bar for 6 months or 2 years or 5 years. But no matter who they were, they would always insist that about the time they got out of the scene, that's the time it was dying. And Al's Bar, it only mattered from this year to that year. And they just so happened to coincide with the years that person was there. When I moved to the American Hotel in early 1994, people were saying, oh my God, you should have been here 3 years ago. 91, 92, it was called the Ecstasy Hotel, and everybody was on ecstasy. Everybody was fucking in different rooms. You missed the glory years. And I'm like, when I drank at Al's in 1986, I came up and did some pretty wild and crazy things before you were here. Oh, anytime you were there before somebody, it was an affront. And anytime they were there before you, they were the cool guy. It's a testament to the vitality of Al's Bar in the American Hotel that everyone who was there felt like they were there at the right time. And that's a really hard thing to sustain over 4 decades when you think about it.
Cut.